What's up guys, it's Calbiter here and welcome back to the Star Ocean Anamnesis character guide. So today, we're going to be taking a look at Dream Welch. Let's go. Dream Welch is an offensive healer with some pretty valuable buffs. Her first talent, Lady's Charm, increases the damage enemies take by 30% when they're sitting at less than 50% HP. So this is the first type of damage buff that we've seen like this. It's not a straight up damage buff, it only applies when the enemy is at less than 50% HP, but you'll notice that as soon as they reach that threshold, your damage is going to go way up. And her second talent, Beachbody, increases the attack or int damage your allies deal by 10% or by 25% when the skill chain is at 3 or more. Now this is a pretty rare buff. Most characters can only give attack damage or int damage after they've rushed, but she can give it pre-rush, so because of that, it's actually pretty valuable. And then her third talent, Brains and Beauty, reduces her AP costs by 20% and gives her anti-flinch during casting. So first of all, anti-flinch during casting is always amazing, especially for healers because it gives them very reliable heals. But that 20% AP cost reduction is also a pretty massive AP cost reduction, and it allows her to do some very long combos. And then her last talent, Troublemaker, increases her int by 15% and her HP by 10%. And then this increases her stats. Her HP goes up to 15,477, which is not too bad, especially not for a healer because they're not going to get hit very often anyway. But her int goes up to 2,898, which is kind of on the low end when it comes to offensive characters. So if you're gonna use her, ideally you want to have some form of int buffing in your party. And then her battle skills, first up we have Faerie Light, recovers some of all allies' HP. Power is determined by multiplying int by 250%, and it costs 60 AP. In actuality, it only costs 48 AP, but it's a pretty good heal because tomes can actually cast pretty fast. And then we have Earth Glaive Infatuation, causes stone lands to emerge from beneath your foe. Its power is determined by multiplying int by 460%, does 2 hits, costs 28 AP, and it has an earth element. This attack is pretty good. Tomes have some fast cast times, like I said, which means this attack comes out really quickly, and the animation is also really fast, so you can get both hits on most enemies even if they're moving around a lot. And it also does some decent damage. And then we have Infatuated Crush, cause a large weight to descend upon your foe. Its power is determined by multiplying int by 160%, does 2 hits, costs 15 AP, and it has an earth element as well. This attack is actually quite similar to Earth Glaive, except it falls from the sky instead of coming out of the ground like Earth Glaive. It costs less AP, but it also does way less damage. I think Earth Glaive is a bit more reliable than this because it has a wider AoE, but if you want to string together longer combos, I guess you could use this. And then we have Gluttony Bog, create a chocolate swamp and attack your foe. Its power is determined by multiplying int by 840%, does 13 hits, costs 34 AP, and it has an earth element as well. And this is her most damaging attack. The only unfortunate part about it is that the animation takes quite long to complete and you need to get the entire animation to get the max amount of damage out of it, but aside from that, it's amazing. It's also a very decent rush gain attack. And then lastly, we have her Rush, Sweet Pressure, create a large heart by blowing a kiss and use it to crush your foe. Its power is determined by multiplying int by 3,500%, and as a post-rush buff, you recover 70% HP for all allies and you decrease the defense of all enemies by 40% for 20 seconds. This rush does more damage than the rushes of most healers, but it still pales in comparison to most of our other offensive rush options. I would put this about halfway through the rush chain combo, but that post-rush buff is actually pretty decent. 70% HP recovery is very nice for when you're in a pinch, and defense minus 40 is also a pretty rare buff. It doesn't do much aside from increase your damage by a little bit, but it still helps. And for her equipment, seeing as how tomes are a relatively new weapon type, you don't really have much to choose from. Not that you would have had much to choose from otherwise, because she is a caster, which means there is usually only one weapon that works, but you do have some weapons that you can choose. First of all, I recommend the Secret Diary, which you can get from the Mountain Toadstool event. It's got a low int stat sitting at 512, which is not that great for our offensive healer, but it does increase the damage that Gluttony Bog does by 20%, it reduces the damage you take by 10%, and that last factor is unlocked at Limit Break 5, and it increases your rush combo damage. Overall, this thing is decent for a free event weapon, and you could use it, but if you bought the Valentine item sets that give you some Tome coins, you could exchange those for an even better weapon, which is the Tome of Advanced Magical Combat. This thing also has a low int stat sitting at 509, but as a first factor, it increases your int by 15%, which kind of makes up for that low int stat. It also recovers your HP by 5% every 3 seconds, and that last factor is unlocked at Limit Break 5. It increases the critical hit chance by 10%. The HP recovery can help you stay alive a bit longer, which if you're playing a healer, that does not really matter because you could just heal yourself. But that last factor, that's mostly the reason why I want to use this weapon, because crit chance is always nice. Now, personally, I think a case can be made for both the Secret Diary and the Tome of Combat. For which one's better, I don't really know. I would personally go with the Magical Combat one because of that HP recovery, gives you some more survivability, but if you think you can do more damage with the Secret Diary, go with that one. But none of those hold a candle to the Book of Love Poems, which is the Gotcha Tome. It increases Earth damage dealt by 40% and Dark by 30%, gives you an 80% chance of surviving a lethal attack, and at max limit break, you unlock a 15% stun chance. So ideally, this is the tome that you want to run with Welch, because all of her attacks are Earth, so an extra 40% damage is very nice, and Guts is also really good for healers, and an extra stun chance, while not necessary, can increase your damage output. So if you're pulling for Welch, be prepared to spend some gems on this thing. And for accessories, I recommend the Coral Plush, which increases your crit chance by 15% when you're facing the enemy, and reduces attack damage taken when you're in close range, which doesn't really come into play when you're using Welch, but this just increases your damage output by a little bit, and it's overall pretty decent. So for battle skills, none of Welch's skills are actually bad, so what you run mostly comes down to personal preference, but obviously you gotta run Faerie Light. And then secondly, I recommend Earth Glaive Infatuation because I just like the damage output that you get with this thing. And lastly, Gluttony Bog, that's the one that you should pretty much run in all of your setups. Earth Glaive Infatuation, that's the only one that you could possibly exchange for Crush, and with Crush you could do a combo that includes Faerie Light, so you can get some healing out of that. But personally, I just want to go with all-out damage. If you give me an offensive character, I'm going to make a full-on offensive setup. And speaking of combos, this is what her combo could look like. A normal attack into Gluttony Bog, into Earth Glaive, into as many Gluttony Bogs as you can fit. And because of Welch's relatively low AP costs, you could always fit a Faerie Light somewhere in the middle of your combo if you need to do some quick healing. Now, it was actually kind of difficult to come up with a party that works around Welch's decently awkward skill set, but I think I came up with something decent. So first of all, I recommend Maria. She increases damage for the entire party by 40%, and post-rush, she increases everybody's crit chance by 40% as well. And luckily, none of this stuff overlaps with what Welch can do, so it can make both of them do some more damage. Welch also has the attack damage buff, which applies to Maria, so both of them can do some decent damage. And then secondly, I threw in Fate. He increases attack for every ally by 30%, and he also increases elemental damage by 15% and 50% post-rush. See what I mean when I say Welch is difficult to build parties around? I have to build a physical party because int parties just don't really work right now. But seeing as how Welch does use elements, Fate's elemental damage up can make her do more damage. Of course, it can make everybody who's using elemental weapons do more damage, but he's mostly here to help Welch out, and the attack buff that's there because Maria is also in this party, so we do need some form of physical buffing. And then lastly, to fix this disaster, I also threw in a Princess Miki, because believe it or not, she buffs int by 10% for the entire party. She's also here so that she can draw aggro away from Welch, so that she can do her healing duty and her casting duty, and she also reduces the damage the entire party takes by 40% post-rush. Unfortunately, Princess Miki's damage output is kind of abysmally low, so Dream Welch is gonna have to work overtime here. Hopefully the int buff is enough to make up for that. Regardless, you can see that this party is kind of terrible, and like I said, that's because Welch just really doesn't work in any party that we can make now. Now, in short, Welch is an offensive character, but she does have a decent set of buffs, most notably the attack and int damage buff, which is still incredibly rare for most characters, and it does make your damage output go up by a lot. The extra 30% damage taken is also not too bad, and even though she's mostly an offensive character, she does possess an anti-flinch, and she also has a huge heal on her rush, which makes her a very decent healer. Not to mention the fast cast times of the tome also means that her Faerie Light can come out incredibly quickly. Now, unfortunately for Welch, like I said in the party section, it's really hard to build parties around her because she's mostly an int character, which means she needs some kind of int buffer if she wants to do a lot of damage, considering that she's meant to be an offensive character. But a lot of the int buffers that we have now, Fiore being the first and foremost, a lot of her talents overlap with those of Welch, so you can't really run them together. On top of that, one of them is going to be off element, they don't have the same elements, so that kind of sucks. And if you run her in a physical party, she does bring some good buffs to the party, but it's not an ideal setup. If you're gonna do that, you might as well run like a full physical party instead of throwing in Welch, you know? And that kind of puts her in a weird spot. I think she'll be pretty good for public play because you don't know who you're going to be partied up with, of course, but in pre-made parties there are better options. Alright, and that does it for the Dream Welch guide. I had some trouble finding some free Welches in my support list to actually record footage for this, but that doesn't really matter. Apparently we're also getting Mirage and Official On tomorrow, so that's going to be pretty fun. They're both very decent characters. I'm looking forward to that. But hope that was helpful, and I guess we'll see you all next time. Peace!